Hi to Colin. Richie, as you've discussed before, in case anybody didn't realise it, Dominic Cummings, former advisor to Boris Johnson, told us how Westminster is run. I can't recommend highly enough that people find that clip on YouTube. Then they will realise that voting is indeed futile. I'd say so. Let us welcome back to the programme an author, the man behind books like The Traitors of Ireland, former BBC journalist, a terrific curator of facts about secret societies like Bilderberg and many more. And he presents a show out of Bristol every Friday between 5 and 8 p.m, not the BCFM Politics Show. You'll find it at thisweek.org.uk. Welcome back to my friend and your friend, the great Tony Gosling. Tony, welcome back. How are you?
Oh, hi, Richie. You didn't mention the Druids.
Didn't mention the Druids, did I?
Winston Churchill was a Druid. Archbishop Roland Williams was a Druid. They're still around, whatever it is, 2,000 years after the Romans were supposed to have gotten rid of the Druids. Anyway, look, these are just covers, I think, for small groups of people that like to think they can tell us exactly what to do from behind the scenes, and we'll never uncover what they're up to. But, of course, we're doing it all the time. We're doing it today.
There's a load I want to get through in the time we have. I suppose we have about 45 minutes, so there's lots I want to get through. First things first, you worked at the BBC with distinction for some years. How does it mean anything to you anymore when you hear about corruption at the BBC? So we learned in recent days, in fact, the Telegraph did a big splash on this. Their deputy editor, I believe, is the man who's fronting this up, that Panorama have been stitching various video clips together in programmes to make it look like Donald Trump was suggesting things he wasn't really suggesting, and all of this kind of skullduggery. What do you make of this revelation? Even it continues to drip out. So today, the same newspaper has more in this dossier of corruption at the BBC, where they're saying they're skewing or slanting what is going on in Gaza and not representing the reality of Gaza in a fair and balanced way. What do you reckon when you hear? What do you reckon? Because you worked there yourself.
Well, okay, to be fair, I didn't work in network radio or television. I worked in local radio, but in London, which was a massive radio station. But, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The BBC has become an Orwellian, mind-bending organisation. So it has to tell the truth sometimes on minor matters, otherwise people would never believe it. But on all of the really big issues, so, for example, the main news today is all about the budget, the economy, the solutions, and even the analysis of what's going on is utterly and completely perverse and perverted by the BBC. But this wasn't always the case. I was at a Halloween do the other night, chatting to a guy who was a big fan of Dennis Potter. And he reminded me about this drama. I mean, we're not just talking about news here. We're talking about the whole BBC, really, and the way it's been steered, called The Singing Detective. It was lovely to be reminded of that because it's an absolutely brilliant and beautiful piece of television written by Dennis Potter and obviously produced at the BBC in 1987. And it struck me, 87, that was the last year that the BBC actually looked after the public, served the public, and was working for the public. Because in that year, Victor Rothschild, it was the Thatcher era, Victor Rothschild had a word in the ear of the chairman of the BBC, Marmaduke Hussey. And that word, or few words, was, can you sack the Director General? So they got rid of the Director General, Marmaduke Hussey, whose wife was the head, the top lady in waiting at the palace. Got rid of Alistair Milne, who was the Director General. He'd been working there for years on the Tonight programme and other, actually mainstream media. And so from that date in 1987, the BBC really has been utterly denuded, and it's become the Director General that took over once Alistair Milne had been sacked, and he was sacked because the programmes he'd been producing were very critical of Margaret Thatcher, and they were, for example, pointing out the far right within the ruling Conservative Party at the time, Neil Hamilton, etc., etc. So that was on a Panorama called Maggie's Militant Tendency. They'd done a programme on Radio 4, My Country, Right or Wrong, which was all about shoot to kill policy in Northern Ireland. So it wasn't just the BBC. Thames Television did Death on the Rock as well as a documentary in the 80s. But the point was to turn the BBC into something which was an establishment puppet. And you can't just simply have raw propaganda. You've got to have a little bit of truth. So slowly but surely, and I was working there at the time, as this was working its way through the production offices. So you've got nepotism, you've got Zionists being appointed to senior producer positions, as they were in Greater London Radio, where I was working, and the descent of the BBC till we've got to the point with BBC Verify now. It is utterly. I mean, look at, for example, the coverage of the budget at the moment. What they're saying is, oh dear, this isn't it difficult that why can't she just say we're going to break our election promises? Well, that wouldn't be the first election promise they've broken. They're not interested in election promises. They get in under the wire and then they do what the hell they want nowadays because they're not held up to proper scrutiny by the BBC.
Or what they're told. Not what they want to do, what they're told to do.
Well, exactly, what's scripted, yeah. So in a way, we're watching a kind of news script with most of the items on these news bulletins are really just adverts for some kind of war policy, World Economic Forum policy, Agenda 2030 policy. This is what we're getting now. So all I'm saying is pointing to 1987 as the year when all this started to change, and it's changed slowly. But now we've got the situation where if you look at the Press Gazette's rating of trust in our media, it's at an all-time low. It's less than 30% of British population trust what they see and they read on the mainstream media and here in the radio. Less than 30%. And so the BBC's answer is what? BBC Verify. So this is Marianna Spring and her chums that occasionally tell the truth about something, but the idea is not to actually correct the journalism in the first place, but to have a special little sort of nodule that appears on the screen that says, it's okay, we're checking these facts and we're finding out exactly what's really going on. And of course, the main facts that they're checking are people like me on social media who are putting out information that challenges what the BBC are saying. So it's an Orwellian response. They're not interested in actually doing good journalism. They're interested in having something which convinces the stupid people that they're checking their facts and they are doing good journalism. They're not actually interested in good journalism. They're interested in mind control.
By the way, I didn't challenge Tony on the Mill story with Rothschild because it happened. You can read about it online, Wikipedia, anywhere you want to read it.
No, you can read about it. You can read about it in his autobiography, in Marmaduke Hussey's autobiography.
In his book, yeah. But it was verified by other sources too. That's right. Rothschild was actually a Labour peer, wasn't he, at the time? Yeah. Ironically, when he had Milne sacked. You're listening to Tony Gosling. Look, not to depress our listeners. I think I depressed them in the monologue. But I think it's important that people at least hear series. I mean, I could be very, very much wrong. I hope not. But I want to throw something at you. I mentioned this today. It is my belief that in the next few years, the biggest news story in history will break. And that is, whichever party happens to be in government or coalition, they're going to basically announce that they cannot cover benefit, welfare, social care or public services. They're going to say we can't pay the bills. For the first time in history, a Western democracy is going to say we can't do it. And I believe they'll use that as an excuse to completely move the current financial system to a new one. And they'll do it through bail-ins at the beginning. Serious bail-ins. They'll freeze people's accounts. They'll take money through bail-ins. And they'll introduce the digital pound at that stage and say the digital pound is the de facto currency. You can't use cash anymore. And they'll say they'll need to do this because tax receipts are at an all-time low. They'll have to do it. And this is how I see things happening. I've gamed this over and over and over again in different scenarios. And I can only see this as the way we're going, because we're seeing the signs, NHS waiting lists not coming down, local services crumbling, councils going bankrupt, the legal system delays stretching into years. My own case is not going to be heard until February of 2027, would you believe? Right? Because there's no room for it. And when they admit there's no extra money to be found, rationing will go from being very subtle to very explicit, means testing everything, the closure of non-essential services. It'll be problem, reaction, solution, and that'll be the end of the financial system as we know it. Is that scary or what? Or is it a load of old baloney? What do you reckon?
No, look, I think you're totally right. But before it will be war. I think you'll find that there will be some sort of, that will be the excuse that's blamed on it. Now, the Bradbury pound is something that an old pal of mine from the 9/11 Truth Movement, Justin Walker, started talking about probably about maybe a decade ago now. But this is what Rachel Reeves should be doing. This will never be talked about by Ben Chew, by Faisal Islam, by Robert Peston, or any of the other mainstream media, financial City of London, public relations, so-called financial correspondents, because it's the solution. What you do is you basically print money. Now, they've been printing money for quantitative easing ever since 2008. This goes in to pump up asset prices and share prices, so things like business, property values, this sort of thing, company values. That's what the QE's been spent in. But John McDonnell had quite a good idea when he was Shadow Chancellor, a Labour guy. This called quantitative easing for the people. What you do is you just print money, you make money up as a government. You have the right to do that. You're a sovereign a currency issuing state, and you can just issue that money and you can give it to poor people. Give it to them, like £150 a week, £200 a week. They will spend it. Now, if you give it to wealthy people, they don't. They save it. But poor people will spend it. So these are the sorts of things that Rachel Reeves should be doing. Another thing, we've just had an amazing thing happen here in Bristol the last couple of weeks, which is the City Council have said that they will no longer be sending any bailiffs to reclaim debts accrued by people in the city who can't pay their council tax or haven't paid their council tax. So another thing, that is because the council tax has been going up and up at the maximum possible rates, but people's disposable income is not, and also the services are going down that the council's providing.
They're doing less, yeah.
Well, we're now talking about in Bristol once every 3 weeks a bin collection. We've got great big clusters of bins at the end of most of the streets that are just covered with rubbish, and there's just junk lying around everywhere. What that's doing by saying they're no longer going to send bailiffs to collect council tax is a positive thing. What they're doing is they're admitting the council tax has failed. Now, this was a tax back in the 1980s, the poll tax in the 90s. Thatcher and Major put in the council tax, and sort of replaced the poll tax really. But it moved the taxation away from people that own property into people that live in the property. So you've got the ridiculous situation in the 1990s and up till today, where Buckingham Palace pays something like £2,800 a year in what used to be rates, which is now council tax. So no, it's the owners of big properties that should be paying more, and not people who've got actually nothing. They've got no money whatsoever. And so they've admitted that in Bristol. So this is something Rachel Reeves could be doing in her budget, is abolishing council tax, Richie.
Yeah. People listening to this programme who might be relatively new to a show like this, they might scream at you and say, well, where would councils derive their funding then?
The rates. In Northern Ireland, they still have the rates. Let's just do it like we used to do. The people with the money, you tax them, not the people with nothing.
But the people with the money are usually people who are running businesses. You tax them, they go out of existence. You don't have businesses, you don't have places for people to go and work.
Well, I agree. But the thing is that the economy is falling apart. I don't know if you saw this. I sent it to you, actually. I messaged it to you today.
Yeah, I've got it here, yeah.
Which is that article from the Telegraph, which shows that Britain is the worst performing economy in the world, that our debt to GDP, which is one of the best ways to look at it. So, your debt is going up, but you're
nearly 100% now, isn't it?
In your economy. So what it does, that graph that the Telegraph put out on Sunday, it shows you that number one, that Britain is the worst, but secondly, that we have actually increased our debt as against GDP more than any other country, and it's more than double the average. So Britain's economy is in a absolute disaster. So what we're saying is that the more you can work and work and work, but you're not going to have enough money to pay for the electricity, the rent, etc., in this country. I think it's worth, sort of reminding ourselves that China, for example, for the last 7 months has announced, that we are going into recession, where our economy is contracting. In this country, we don't dare say it. But of course, our economy is contracting. If you look around, you can see shops closing. You can see people trying to get more wages because the wages aren't paying enough. There's all sorts of indicators out there that the economy is falling apart at the seams because the overheads of everyday life, whether it's electricity, gas, what I was saying, transport, is all going up while people's wages are not matching it by any means. So we're slowly but surely being driven into debt. And Rachel Reeves is not going to do anything to address that because she's working not for us, but for the Uniparty and the World Economic Forum.
Here are some very quick facts for people who might struggle with the terminology, and I'm not patronising anybody. You don't have to be... most clever people don't understand this stuff. It took me long enough to understand it, and I'm not very clever. Look, here's a fact, right? Tony Gosling just said this. UK debt is nearing 100% of GDP. It's a fact. Interest payments are taking exponentially more of government revenue. Government revenue is increasingly being spent on interest payments. That's a fact. Public sector pension liabilities are huge. Right? Massive. More than 50% of households are receiving more from the state than they actually contribute themselves. So with an ageing population, rising pensions, rising healthcare costs, but no money. And then you have a shrinking workforce, which means you have a lower tax base. I looked this up today. Nearly 9.5 million working age adults are economically inactive. It's amazing. Nobody is being honest about the risk here. And this is why I'm not sure about war, T. You can explain what you mean by that in a minute if you want. I'm not sure about war. I can see by 2029, 2030, by the end of this term, they're going to say, this is unprecedented in modern history, but we don't have any money. We can't fund the public services, the social care, the health service, all of that. So that's where I'm kind of coming from. They know that tax rises are toxic. They know that announcing spending cuts is basically suicide. They know this. So they're carrying on with this illusion of sustainability. It's just insane. It's ready. When was the last manufactured crash? 2008. We're long overdue one. And I think we're here. I'll just finish on this before you come back in, T. A friend of mine said to me, he shall remain anonymous. He said, Richie, he's in his early 60s. He said, I have a little bit of mortgage left to pay, and I have cash savings, he says, in the region of about £35,000, which is nice, right? But a lot of people would say if you're in your early 60s, you're still paying a mortgage. And if you have 35 grand in the bank, that's not going to be enough. Especially if you don't trust pensions. I don't trust pensions because they'll all collapse, I believe. But anyway, so he said to me, like, what would you do with the £35,000 cash? I haven't a clue. I couldn't tell him. I have no right to be giving financial advice to anybody. But he said, is it at risk, that £35,000? Well, I said, if it's still there doing nothing in 2 or 3 years' time, it's at serious risk. Come back in on this war, Tony. So you reckon before my scenario, there would have to be a war. I don't think the people of this country would stomach a war. Tell me why you think they might.
Well, I don't think they would, but they will be told there's a war. Whether it's Russia or whatever. I mean, that seems to be the obvious one that they're cooking up at the moment. But I want to say something about these figures, these Telegraph figures, because I noticed that that what they did is they looked that the problems really got worse over the last 20 years. So they went back to 2005. That's when this explosion of debt really started. And then, of course, 2008, it got even worse with the bailouts, all this money that went to save all the rich people's bank accounts. Because if you have a bank account and there's a crash and the banks crash, you will only keep, I think I'm right in saying, is it £38,000 of the money the government will guarantee, and the rest of it goes. Now, that affects rich people much more than poor people, which is why Gordon Brown had to, as he said at the time, save the world in 2008 and bail the banks out to help the rich people, not the poor people. So The big change that's happened since 2005 is Tony Blair introducing much relaxed rules on immigration. So the point of that was, he was saying, look, this is going to really help the economy. If we have more migrants, it's going to be great for our economic figures. The fact of the matter is, I think it's been a disaster. You don't need to be a genius to work out that for every migrant that you bring in, you're putting one person in Britain on the dole. So that's going to be costing you money. And also, so much of the money, it seems to me, the idea is to increase profitability of private businesses. And that money doesn't even necessarily stay in the country. A lot of it goes to foreign shareholders. So this complete collapse that Rachel Reeves is just sort of dancing around trying to pretend isn't happening, it really began with the opening of the doors to mass migration. Now, it didn't happen so big in 2005, but ever since it's been enormous. I mean, we're now looking at, isn't it, 750,000 people a year. I don't know what it's going to be next year, but and we're not just talking about the small boats. We're talking about planned migration,
legal migration. Well said. Yeah, people who come on work visas. So
exactly.
So here's the thing. You're bang on.
It's mainly the care sector. That's a massive area where migrants are coming into work here. But there are other areas too, the NHS. There's a whole bunch of areas which would not function in this country if it wasn't for cheap labour being brought in. So my point is that that's when things started to change. Blair and the introduction of this idea that we need to bring in more and more outside cheap labourers in order to boost the economy. The exact opposite has been the result.
Hugely important that people remember this. I can't argue with Todd. I'd love to argue with him here, but I can't. He's absolutely right. It began, it began, this is massively important to understand. This accelerated in the late noughties, as we approached 2010. And the Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition did nothing about it either. They were happy for it to continue. Economists, particularly independent economists, were warning. They were tiptoeing around it. They were very concerned about being labelled as racist. But they were warning about the problems with it. If you grow a country like the UK, by a net gain of a city the size of Cardiff every year, and at the same time, you're spending less and less on public services and on the health service and on everything else, collapse is inevitable. And I believe a lot of what we see in our daily news bulletins is to distract people away from the reality of what is happening and why it's happening. And this is where it's coming. Tony Gosling, thisweek.org.uk, go to bilderberg.org, don't download, go and buy a copy of The Traitors of Ireland. Listen to Tony on Fridays, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. I believe, and look, as a non-religious guy, it's a bit disingenuous of me to throw terms around like demonic. I believe Blair is a walking demon, right? If Blair is a walking demon, by Christ, Dick Cheney was a demon, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And there's one other thing I'd just like to say about the migrants.
Before we move on to Cheney,
the property prices. That's another thing, because the mass migration has caused an absolute explosion in the property prices, which would have been depressed because people couldn't afford them. The massive increase in demand for property as increased rents, and it's made it look like the economy is doing well. So much of what is going on in our economy is negative for us. So if you have to pay a massive increase in your mortgage or in your rent or in your house price or whatever to buy a house, or in your transport or your electricity, this is all seen by people like Rachel Reeves as positive because it's growth. It's growth in the amount of GDP, the amount of money people are spending. But it's a disaster because it means that you're having to pay to breathe the air around you. Every single day you have to pay just to be alive. This XYZ amount to go to work on a bus for whatever it is, £3.50 in each direction now. In many places, the tube in London is costing a fortune. The train, everything is costing more. This is seen as growth and it's seen as good. But sorry, you talked about Dick Cheney.
I did, but just before we did, hang on, because you have fired up the imaginations of our listeners. So let me read out a few of these. Chiro says, Richie, get £30,000. Tell your friend to get £30,000 in premium bonds first as a minimum while he decides where to invest it. He'll get tax-free wins. Tax-free wins, not a lot, but better than a kick in the arse. And then he goes on to talk about silver. Faisal says, funnily enough, while the UK economy and GDP versus debt and tax receipts is at an all-time low, corporate profits are at an all-time high. Yet the government, and it doesn't matter which side is in power, only ever increases taxes on working people and small businesses. A number of people came back to say that one of our earlier messages, one of our earlier listeners who said that the average rent now in the UK, right across the UK, is £1,400 a month. I balked when I heard that. I couldn't believe it, but apparently it is. Somebody else came back to say, both you and Tony are wrong, Rich. It's £85,000 per person that is insured. So if you've got deposits in the bank and you're lucky enough to have £85,000 or more, the government guarantees £85,000 per person. Others are saying they wouldn't trust the government in the event of any collapse in any case. Raymond, this is really good, Tony. Raymond says, Richie, councils receive funding from central government in arrears. And he gives an example. So if Salford had, say, 60,000 households in 2021, government funding in 2025 is for 60,000 households. It doesn't matter if it has increased, if the houses have increased in that particular time. So it seems to be every 4 to 5 years that they rejig the funding. So basically, if the actual number of households is 63,000 in 2025, and there are more people in social care, well, then there's less money to go around. I didn't realise this, that government funds local authorities in arrears. Very interesting, that, Ray. I'll have to, I know who Ray is, so he's probably right, but I'll have to check it out. Mad times. And it is depressing stuff, and people worry, and I don't want people listening to the Richie Allen show worrying about it, but it is going to be a reality in the next few years. And you need
I don't think it was depressing, Richie. I don't find it depressing.
Some of our listeners do, though. They're telling me that they're really pissed off listening to this. You know?
But it's to understand what's going on. You know, you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief. Right, well, that's what they're up to now, and then you can get together with your people who are not somehow telling us what to believe or what to. You know, you have an ability to have a camaraderie with others around who also understand what's going on. So the other thing to say about all of this, of course, is it fuels race hatred. So what with about 5 or 6 million people coming in from abroad, obviously not all of one particular race or another, there are legitimate concerns about this, which express themselves through racism. You know, the racism is not in any way legitimate, because this is the oligarchs, the oligarchy that have created this system, that those people are just trying to do the best opportunity for themselves. But it is creating, and it has created the sort of the examples of people like Tommy Robinson, who love to jump on this racist bandwagon, particularly the anti-Muslim bandwagon, and making out that they are the only people that care about nationalism or the national interest anymore. And so this, I think, is one of the deliberate side effects of all of this, is they're trying to start race wars. This is the purpose, I think, of, much of what we see. And I mean, for example, the rally that there was a couple of months ago in central London, talking about, this is a patriots rally. We're waving the flag. They're hijacking the flag. They're even hijacking the Christian cross, some of these people, to try to say that, if you're British, or you're waving the British flag, or if you're a Christian, you've got to hate the Muslims. You've got to hate the migrants, and we're going to actually have to get rid of them because they're trying to take over. So there's a whole sub-agenda, dog whistle thing going on here in the background.
There is. There is, but you quite rightly said there are legitimate concerns with lots and lots of young men coming from very conservative backgrounds in the Middle East, arriving on our shores, and nobody knows anything about them. But you're right, you beautifully illustrated why this is happening. Now, Robinson was found not guilty of a terror offence today. He had been pulled over months and months ago, hadn't he, coming back into the country or leaving the country, whichever, it doesn't matter. He was asked to provide the access details for his phone. He said no. He was arrested and charged. I despise everything about him, but it's a good decision. Whatever he isn't a terrorist, and him being found not guilty is justice served. What do you think?
I think he is a terrorist.
How?
He's somebody who is sowing as much disinformation, lies, and slander about the Muslim faith, particularly, as he possibly can. He's a creature of the Zionists. He's a creature of Israel.
Yeah, but race baiting, hang on. Race baiting is not terrorism. He can't be a terrorist. He's a race baiting grifter, little bastard. He's probably incredibly wealthy. I wouldn't mind getting a hold of him, T, somewhere for a couple of minutes. And I say that now tongue in cheek because I'm not particularly violent, but he's not a terrorist though.
He's enabling this, right? I was chatting with some people from West Surrey Palestine Solidarity Campaign. No publicity is being given to this incident at all. But they are above a motorway bridge. I think it was in Egham over the M25, just waving some Palestine flags for the motorists. Some of the motorists driving underneath, tooting away. Just one of those things you do when they're almost all of them were pensioners, about 7 people, and about 7 thugs being filmed by a couple of women on their phones came and beat up all these pensioners, and cheering on for Tommy Robinson as they were doing it. Now, this has not really been reported. It was about 2 weeks ago. A friend of mine who was one of those pensioners, he was hospitalised. They found a hairline fracture in his skull. He'd been knocked unconscious to the ground by these Robinson thugs. So this is a part of the game. And it seems to me that ever since that mass rally that Robinson held, where he had that ridiculous situation with the Maoris chanting for imperialism and again for the Israelis and against, which, by the way, they're a Christian Zionist church in Auckland. And many of them are not actually Maoris. They black themselves up to make themselves look like Maoris. So ever since then, I'm being told from various sources that there's a real increase in violent attacks on peaceful Palestine protesters.
Yeah, it's unfair to blame it on him, though.
One of the last examples.
It's very unfair to blame it on him. It's got nothing to do with him.
Robinson is running this operation, Richie.
How do you know
He's running it for the Zionists. He's running it for the Israelis. He's running it for the Mossad.
Can we agree on something? Let's agree. T, hang on. Let's agree on something. This guy, I've never used the C word on live radio, and I never will. I'm not going to. This guy is the dregs of humanity. I interviewed him a few times years ago from Spain, and the last time I interviewed him, he walked off the live program. He wasn't too impressed with some of the questions, right? I'm not bigging myself up. They weren't the most robust of questions. I find him to be the scum of the earth. Like the scum of the earth. No doubt about it. But he's also quite clever. And for him, I believe it's only about the money and the cocaine and nothing else. That's how I see it. He's quite happy to be used by anybody who'll pay him enough money. Sickening to see him go to Israel and to call himself a journalist. It must make you, as a real journalist, as a great journalist, want to vomit when he says I'm a journalist. It certainly makes me want to vomit. But that's all he is. And who's worse, him or the idiots who follow him? And he would say, whatever I am, he would say, Tony, I do not encourage violence. In fact, I've condemned violence. I am not a racist. I have no problems with Muslims, he would say. My issue, he would say, is with radical Islam. And he might say, and you'll get plenty of time to come back here, he might say, by the way, whether I expose the grooming gangs or not, whether I did or didn't, I was screaming from the rooftops about it for years, and all people ever did was call me a racist. That's what he would say. A lot of people in this country, pal, and I obviously abhor him, I've said it already, a lot of people in this country now see him as a bit of a working class hero. Back to you.
Well, I know they do. That's the game. But the fact of the matter is he's working with and for the Israelis and with and for the Mossad. And these are the people that want to create race wars here in Britain. So, I mean, I would also compare the treatment that we saw in the press to Robinson's arrest at the airport and that of the people like Richard Medhurst and other journalists that have been arrested who are pro-Palestine. So, for a start, Robinson is right up number 2 on the bulletin today around the country. They weren't on hardly any bulletins. They were on marginal websites and things like that. So the BBC and the mainstream press are pointing the finger at Tommy Robinson. He's the only kind of person that this sort of thing happens to. They're ignoring the fact that we've had something like 10 or 12 very serious, very good pro-Palestinian journalists arrested in the airports or detained, and there's been little or no coverage about any of them. But the other thing is, We heard Tommy Robinson's voice on the television and on the radio, and it'll be in the newspapers, no doubt, tomorrow. He will be quoted. So they're not only reporting on it, they're actually giving him his voice around the country. So they are fueling this, and they're fueling this because our security services, who I think are very, very strong within the mainstream press in London, particularly the people like the Home Affairs correspondents and the Foreign Affairs correspondents, will be pushing this out. So we're hearing Tommy Robinson and his message, I'm the victim, I'm the victim. We're hearing nothing whatsoever about the other side. And this is what I mean about the BBC from the 1980s.
Well, we don't blame him for it, though. Why would we blame Robinson for this unbalanced approach to covering the issue? I mean, like I said, in my opinion, Robinson is just a grifter.
Which involves, it doesn't just involve him, it also involves the mainstream press bamboozling us. They're working together.
You're listening to Tony Gosling. This is controversial. Some of our listeners have a bit of sympathy for him. They understand that he's a self-aggrandizing, effectively a politician. But on some level, he's a politician, Robinson. There's no doubt about that. Look, I said, and it doesn't matter what I said. My opinion was many years ago. The left abandoned its base, especially on the issue of immigration, despite the fact people that, and you know this better than anybody, and I'm not kissing your arse, you know this better than anybody. The likes of Tony Benn and the former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, and their peers, even Corbyn, the fucking grifter, right? For years in the 80s, they warned about open door migration because of the impact it would have on the working class and on unionised workers. They warned about it. And what happened then in the last 10 to 15 years? So Blair and Brown and their successors opened the floodgates, opened the doors, and the working man and woman said, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, what's going on? And they were called racist by the party supposed to represent them. And into that vacuum came Tommy the dickhead, didn't he? Because, hey, these people are looking for somebody who listen to them, somebody who won't call them racist. Well, I'll be that guy, you know. And if the Beeb and GB News and Sky gave him all of that coverage, I don't blame Tommy for it. That's my personal opinion. I despise him. I can't say it enough times. I loathe him and everything he represents. He's a football hooligan, woman-beating thug scumbag. That's all he'll ever be. But he's ultimately a pawn, Tony. And I agree. And he's working. It's working, right? A much
bigger game, and if he wasn't doing it, they'd get someone else to do it. But it is a very big game that's being played here, and it's all to do, I think, with Zionism, to do with demonising Islam, and the idea, of course. I mean, don't forget all of the maniacs that were fighting Gaddafi, were fighting Assad, the people that we were funding back in the early noughties. After 2010, with Gaddafi and the overthrow now, as there was a civil war, so-called, in Syria. These people were all brought back to Britain with no checks. MI5 said, no problem, they've been jihadi fighters, but they can come back to Britain now. Now, there were hundreds of them, and the idea was, in many other parts of the world, anyone that had been involved in these civil wars, when they came back to their country of origin, they were detained immediately, and they would be very, very close. Checks kept on them here. No problem. Just bring them back home. So we do have, potential. I've also mentioned, I don't know if you've come across this guy, John Stockwell, former colonel in the Central Intelligence Agency from the 1980s, 90s. No. Richie, have you?
No.
John Stockwell, we had a clip from him on our show last Friday.
I didn't hear
where he talks about the CIA's tactic around the world. Listen, they've practiced all around the world. They're now trying it on us, on the home territory, which is they would fund and arm minority groups in countries in order to create civil wars.
Yeah.
And so why would they think about not doing that here too? I think that's exactly the sort of thing it was tried very successfully, horrifyingly, in Nicaragua, as Stockwell talks about. Obviously, we're seeing now the United Arab Emirates and
funding the slaughter in Sudan.
Yeah, funding doing exactly this in Sudan, finding a small minority group, giving them loads of money, loads of guns, and starting a civil war. in my view, to distract away from what's still going on in Gaza. The idea is always this is another, this is much more important at the moment, and it's distracted from much of the coverage of the constant killing the Israelis are still doing in Lebanon and in Gaza. So this, I think, is something we need to watch out for here. So as you get a disgruntled minority group being created through jihadis being brought here by MI5 and said, yeah, it's okay, you just mingle back into the community, and also by, race hatred being seeded between white and black people, you can see what the potential outcome could be in our communities. And that, to me, is one of the most dangerous things to look forward to, if you want to look forward to it, in the future. We need to be prepared for that sort of thing. And this is, I think, what our government is trying to do, is preparing this sort of thing, particularly through security services and foreign intelligence agencies, in order to destabilize. As you were talking about the currency collapse, the financial collapse, as that happens, this will start to kick off, because people will just be desperate for anything to be able to stay alive, whether it's food or energy. And these, of course, are the two things. If you can make food in your country cheap and energy in your country cheap, everything else will be a success. But in Britain, we're now seeing massive increases both in food prices and energy prices. And at some point in the future, it's all going to fall apart.
It's going to collapse,
isn't it? Quite nasty.
You are listening to Tony Gosling, thisweek.org.uk. The show will be live on Friday at 5 p.m. Do not miss it. Right, I'm going to read a few messages. You're right, by the way. I mean, the money behind the Robinson organisation, the rebel media, it's massive. I mean, they seem to have limitless funding. I'm going to read about 5 messages. I'm not going to discriminate. I'm going to read them at random. Dominic says, Nick Griffin, former leader of the British National Party, said more than a decade ago that Robinson had taken over the right wing and that he was supported by Zionists. According to Griffin, they were going to cleanse Gaza, and Robinson's job was to build anti-Muslim sentiment. That's if you believe Nick Griffin, maybe. James says, yes, everything you guys said about Robinson is right, but grooming gangs is a fact, it's a real thing, and he was shouting about it when others were not saying anything at all. Charlotte reckons, yes, he is paid and owned by the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service. Lots of people opining on this. Somebody came on to say Robinson, Fran, I think, is constantly doing the rounds on certain UK-based podcasts, and they seem very, very keen to platform him. They do, but for them it's reflected glory. When they have him on, they think they'll build their own followings, that they'll boost their own subscriber list, I suppose. So much more on this. I wanted to ask Tony, in the 10 or so minutes we have left, because he has been writing about, researching, talking about for many, many, many years now, secret societies, but also the intelligence agencies and their experimentation with mind control techniques. And it's amazing, this Anthony Williams story. So this amazing story developed on Saturday. Everybody knows about it now. I don't have to give the full story, but there was a train on the way to King's Cross. It had to pull into a station because a man went on the rampage with a knife, talked about the devil. The devil's not going to win. He injured nearly a dozen people, one person very seriously. And then the police referred themselves to the watchdog because they said it might be the case that in the preceding days leading up to the train attack, this man might have attacked people in public elsewhere. What are you reading in this, Tony? It seems to be a very bizarre story.
Well, and the police didn't respond to some of those attacks.
That's right.
They didn't even bother to respond. Look, I want to say something really quickly about grooming gangs, really quickly. The stats are most child rape is by white men, not grooming gangs. So, look, but with this attack on Saturday, I mean, it's obvious from what he's saying, the devil won't win. The guy's psychotic. It's almost certain that he's on some kind of antidepressant type drugs. He's been treated for this sort of thing. And I've seen quite a lot of examples of people who are on antidepressants. Of course, they don't just stop your depression. They get you dependent and they turn you crazy. And anyone that knows anything about the dependency that these drugs can cause will know they can destroy a person, like forever. They can permanently alter your brain so that you can't actually function as a human being anymore. I personally think they should be banned immediately. But if you look at the development, these are a Nazi development. They're from Bayer. The company Bayer in the Second World War was experimenting with these kinds of drugs. So it sounds very innocuous, an antidepressant, and it's going to stop you being depressed. But it's what you really need to do to address depression is to alter your circumstances. In the old days, that would be, find you a council house. It would be increase your benefits, or maybe get you a nice job, the sort of job that you want to do. So looking at the person and their well-being rather than taking a pill, so you don't have to bother with the person anymore. And of course, with the psychiatric system and the medical system now that we have, certainly when I was growing up, these are the sorts of things you might go and have a chat to a priest or a vicar about, I'm feeling a bit depressed. What can I do to lift my spirits? Spirit being the operative term. So I think that's what's been going on here. Now, quite what extent the guy was groomed, I'm absolutely convinced the Southport killer was groomed online. There are these groups like the Order of the Nine Ankles that actually do encourage people online to go and kill other people in order to progress through the system and get respect from them. We know that, of course, that AI is also grooming people. I don't know if you heard that tragic story from the United States where the parents had gone through what the chatbot had been grooming their son to commit suicide and making sure that the various activities that he didn't alert his parents to the fact that he was contemplating with some AI chatbot to commit suicide. So these are the things I think would be interesting to look into with the Huntingdon train attack, of course, as well as something you pointed out yesterday, which was that there was a drill, the very same line, basically the same line in the same direction, just a few months ago, back in March, to do that. So it could be that he's been put up to this. It could easily be. And of course, these people who are psychotic are extremely suggestible. You go back to his computer, you'll find everything has vanished. I remember looking into the Shamima Begum case and finding that actually she had been groomed with her 3 Bethnal Green school friends online to go over to join ISIS. And this was being done by the intelligence services. In that case, it was Canadian intelligence that had persuaded her to go over there, helped her with the fares, and then met her at Istanbul airport when she went over there. So this, I think, is the sort of thing that's going on all the time now. As people are isolated, if they're lonely, they're upset, then they're preyed upon, maybe with drugs, but also with online grooming, to go and commit acts like this. And it amazes me that groups like Order of Nine Ankles are not proscribed. This is a Nazi satanic terror group, which is endorsed by my old school friend, Nick Land, who we've talked about from time to time. And of course, he was actually being talked about on the Tucker Carlson show quite a lot recently. But this is a very far right agenda of anarcho-capitalism, where you just get rid of government and you let money rule the world. Now,
no, I have a pushback. Hang on. I have a pushback. Yeah. Hang on. Yesterday, when discussing this, you might have heard it. Thanks for keeping an ear on it. Yesterday, by the way. But John is in Coatbridge, and he's an emergency service worker. And he said yesterday that he would kind of refute the suggestion that there is something more sinister about the train stabbing, right? I am a conspiracy theorist, he says, and I do believe there was far more to 7/7 and 9/11 than we were ever told. In this case, I can confirm we do carry out similar multi-agency drills or exercises with the aim of detecting weaknesses in interagency partnerships, like our communication and all of that. The goal of these exercises, which are run regularly, is to iron out the flaws for actual events. So my humble opinion, Richie, says John in Coatbridge, is that the train stabbing and, the drill was actually an example of a genuine coincidence. That was John. What do you reckon?
Well, it could easily be, but isn't it interesting that there was that other exercise in the same place?
Imagining the same scenario, same place.
The same thing occurring. Yeah, we've had this before, haven't we? It's interesting.
Peter Power.
The point of the whole thing is this is seeding fear, distrust. I noticed one of the first news stories this morning when I was looking was they're talking about having airport-style security at every single train station. Well, there's a few bob for somebody in that, and also, of course, much more surveillance and control And I would like to just plug Sam William. He's a guy that does these tours around London. I don't know if people have seen his YouTube channel. He's been looking at the CCTV in London. And he's also been to Temple in one of his latest. He calls it the Masonic Village in central London. And looking at all of the symbolism and the esoteric signs there are hanging around everywhere. And it's amazing how Temple, somewhere that's so powerful, where the British justice system is based, essentially, the financial side of it anyway, as this beautifully calm place where everyone is kind of super happy. But as soon as he starts filming, someone sort of saunters over to him and quietly says, no, you can't film here, you know. And he just carries on filming them. Of course,
what's the guy's name again, T? What's his name?
He's called Sam William. He's on YouTube, I think, and on X as S. Williamism. He's an a fine art student, but he goes around looking at these curious. And I love a brilliant touch in one of his latest videos. He says at the end of it about London, there's something wrong with this city. And of course, he's right. And it's the history of the empire, the financial empire, the money laundering, and the city of London, essentially, which is this like little private fiefdom run by all these little cults they call guilds and things like the Order of the Garter. So this is a country within a country, and I think much of what goes on in Parliament, as I'm sure you'd agree, Richie, is just for show, for the public, a bit of entertainment.
All theatre. Just before we say goodbye today, guess who's going to be in Bruton on Friday? Me.
You?
Yeah, I'm going to be in Bruton, yeah. I'm going to be roughly in your neck of the woods on Friday. I've got to drive down to Bruton on Friday, yeah. I've got to take the dog down there. She's having specialist treatment down there.
Oh, right, okay.
So we're heading down to Bruton, yeah.
You're not doing a sort of public performance in the village hall then?
In Bruton, I'm not sure. I know very little about. No, I'm not. But I know very little about Bruton, other than it's supposed to be a really pretty place. But yeah, I'll be in and out really. Well, I'll be in.
Well, watch out for the drones, because Somerset has now got a policy where at any time they can launch hundreds of drones across the whole of Somerset. As some sort of emergency response. So who knows? Maybe they'll be flying over your head. And if they
For me,
I would love to see the Sparrowhawks taking them out.
I take it as a great compliment, Tony, if drones are to be launched on account of me. Tony will be live on Friday at 5 p.m. Unmissable stuff. It should be. I wish it was more than weekly. I always catch it a few days later. You know that, but I wish it was more often, but Friday between 5 and 8 p.m. Support Tony's work. Do check out his books, particularly The Traders of Arnhem, because it's very, very, very relevant to everything we discuss at The Traders of Arnhem. I've got about 100 messages to read. I will get to it. Thanks as ever for your time, mate. Can't wait for next time. Godspeed.
Just to say about the book briefly, The Fourth Reich. That's what we're living in. We're living in a financial empire. And what my book does is it explains how that was created at the end of the Second World War, with a deal between Winston Churchill's private secretary, Desmond Morton, and Adolf Hitler's private secretary, Martin Bormann. They did a deal at the end of the Second World War to finance a massive financial economic empire. And Bormann was the guy who was creating all the businesses which the laundered money from stolen wealth from the whole of Europe by the Nazis was laundered into in the late 1940s and early 1950s. And that's, I think, what we're having to deal with today.
Check it out, folks. Tony, all the best. Thanks again for today. Speak real soon.
God bless.
You too, the great Tony Gosling, live on the Richie Allen Show.